Hi patrons, welcome back to the second part of this Graphite Portrait Features tutorial series. So in the first part we worked on a hair study, and so in this part we're going to work on an eye study, and we're going to be using the exact same materials as we did for the hair, but I'll quickly recap them again. So we're going to be using a 4H graphite pencil. You don't need to worry about the brand that you're using, any brand of graphite will do. I'm also using the B grade pencil, a 3B pencil and a 6B pencil. I'm also going to be using the black Faber-Castell polychromos for the really dark areas, 3 blending stumps of just different sizes, and for the highlights and erasing I'm going to be using mainly the kneaded eraser. But in case I want to do some more striking highlights, I've also got a normal eraser as well. So those are all of the materials that I'm using. The paper that I'm doing this on is the Strathmore Bristol 500 series plate surface finish paper, and it is quite expensive, but you don't need to go for the 500 series. The 300 series will do, or any sort of smooth paper will be good for this because you want quite a smooth texture for the skin, so it's best to use a paper that hasn't got too much texture. Another supply that I'm just going to be using is a brush in case I want to wipe away any bits of eraser dust and stuff like that. But let's get straight into it. I've got the sketch outline down, I've attached that to the post as well as the actual reference photo that I'm using. And so we're going to start by working on the iris itself, so the middle portion of the eye here, and I want to start off by blocking in the darkest parts of the eye, and so I'll be starting off using the 3B pencil. So I'm going to lightly build up a layer for the pupil first. I've already got the sort of structures blocked in when I did my sketch, so I know exactly where the pupil is. And I'm pretty much just using circular motions to fill in the pupil. So just go ahead, make sure your pencil is nice and sharp, and just use circular motions to fill in this whole pupil. You don't need to press too hard, we will be using other pencils to get it even darker, so don't feel like you have to get it as dark as it's going to be with this first layer of pencil. So just fill that all in. And then the other darkest parts of the eye is this area here where the upper eyelid is casting a shadow. It's causing a shadow to be cast in this area because the eyelid is coming out a bit further. So this area is shadowed and also around the sides. So I'm just going to create the shade in there. And the way that I'm going to do this is I am going to use lines because the iris has quite a lot of line patterns and flecks where it starts on the outer edge and goes towards the middle. So I am going to use lines to do this. I'm going to avoid shading in the actual highlight. I marked out all of the highlights and where they are with the pencil when I did the sketch. So it is important to sketch out where the main shadows and highlights are going to be. I like to include that sort of detail in my sketch, as well as like the important structures like the pupil and the main structures. I like to include that bit of detail as well. Let's just outline this so we can see our edge of our iris a bit better. And let's go ahead now and fill in this darkest area. Again, keep the pencil strokes nice and light. Don't put too much pressure down on the paper. You just don't need to. So again, I'm still using that 3B pencil. I will be using the 6B pencil later on to darken it up further, but for now I just want to get a nice smooth layer down, so I don't want to use too much of a sort of soft pencil. The darker the number gets on the pencil, the softer it is. So for example, an 8B pencil is a lot softer than a 2B pencil. So what this means is that when you do your pencil strokes, the softer pencil tends to get more blunt a lot quicker, and so you'll have to keep sharpening it. And you also get more fuzzy lines and not as sort of clean lines. So that's why I like to start off using a harder pencil to get the base layer in. And I'm going in the direction of the eye. I want to make the eye look curved, so I'm not just shading it in, I'm going with the flex in the iris in the direction that that's kind of going in. So like I said, this whole sort of section is in a bit of shadow. So I'm just going to shade that in. Again, I want to make sure that I outline these highlights so I don't get them too sort of dark. A bit of the graphite will probably get smudged onto them when I blend it out, but I want to keep it as light as possible for the time being so I don't lose them and lose where they are. So I'm just going to go around them and outline them. Okay. I'm also going to add the dark shade into this side here. So just continue to look throughout the iris, look for the darkest sections within the iris and just use this 3B pencil, keep it nice and sharp and just shade in very lightly these shadowed areas. Make sure you get them all in. When you use the blending stump, it will really soften out all of the shading. So if these pencil strokes look a bit too sort of wiry and too sharp at the moment, when we blend it all out, it will really soften out the look of the eye. I'm just adding some more general shading across the whole area, using circular motions on both sides, really darken it up. Going at it from different angles will help give you a darker look without having to apply too much pressure to it, because it means that you're filling in all of the white grain of the paper from all of the different angles. So that's a really useful tip if you guys want to make sure that you're getting your images nice and dark without having to apply loads of pressure. Just try and go in different directions, use circular motions, and this will help fill in all of that white grain because you'll be filling it in from all of the different angles. And also, if you want to get a darker look, make sure that your pencil is still very sharp, because again, if you have a sharper point, it means you can get into those white grains, those textures, crevices in the paper. So now I'm going in with the 3B pencil and working on some of these darker parts around the pupil. These aren't as dark though, so I'm being a bit lighter with the pencil. Like I said, this is just the base layer. We can add more detail later on. But for now, we just want to get the basis down of all of the main tones. Okay. So again, going over with another layer of shading just to make sure that I get it nice and dark and fill in all of that white grain. Gonna add a light layer of this freebie pencil now to the whole area apart from the lightest, brightest highlights. I'm going in pencil lines with the direction that the iris flecks are going in. Now I'm going in again just to darken up some areas that are a bit darker, glazing over a layer of the graphite. Just look at your reference photo and try and identify all of the dark parts. Every iris is sort of different and has unique flecks and unique shadows. So make sure that you're looking at your reference photo that you're drawing to identify the shadows that you need to include. So now I'm going to switch over to the 6B pencil and just add a layer over the darkest areas, so the pupil and the outside edge of the iris and also the top part of the iris where that shadow is being cast over it. And we can keep building up the shadows. Once we blend this out, we can then add another layer of shadow and just keep building it up until we're happy with how dark it is. Because this might not be dark enough, we might want to go even darker with it. So we'll see what it looks like once we blend it out. Okay, nearly done. Just want to look for the other darkest areas in the iris now. Make sure I've got everything nice and dark before we blend it out. Everything that needs to be dark anyway. So add some shadows here and more over this section. There's also quite a lot of shadow in here. The highlights are just very tiny. There's quite a lot of shadow around that highlight. And also there's some shadows within this highlight itself. A few lines. You don't have to do it exactly the same as the reference photo. You don't have to get every fleck in the exact same place because, again, you are just using it for reference. You don't have to make it exactly like the reference photo unless you're doing something like a commission where you're doing a portrait for someone, then you would want to make it as close to the reference photo as possible. But for this, we don't actually need it to be exactly like the reference photo. Just look at it for the general shadows and all of that stuff. I'm going to switch back over to the 3B pencil to add some shading to those areas that aren't quite the darkest. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to go in, add some details within this highlight here, and go in with the 6B. Again, add those details, and let's go in and blend this out now with the blending stump. So I'm going to use quite a small blending stump and just go in, first blend the pupil, and then we're going to blend out, and I want to blend from the middle to the outer edge, or from the outer edge towards the middle, but I'm not going back and forth, I'm just sweeping the blending stump from one end to the other. I'm not worried about going over the highlights. It's okay if you get some value onto the highlight. You don't want it to be really just white. You want it to have a bit of value on there, but we'll lighten it up later when we use our kneaded eraser. Make sure everywhere is smoothed out, that you haven't got a grainy look to any part of the eye. You want it all to look very smooth and very nice. So now that's much softer. Let's go in with the 6B pencil, darken up the pupil again. Really define the outline of that pupil. I'm going to add some more shading to the top part here. Basically just go through all the darkest shadows again. And really make everything pop and stand out. I'm using some circular motions where it's all just quite dark, and then I feather it out in lines. So I'm using more pressure now just to get it really nice and dark. There we go. Do the same thing on this side as well. Just use quite a bit of pressure, really shade this whole section, and then feather the edges out so that it's not a clear cut off. We don't want it just to be a really harsh edge where it cuts off. We want it to nicely transition to the rest of the area. Add the shadow here as well. So now I'm going to move on to using the 3B pencil to add those other shadows that aren't quite as dark. Just really get them in. There's kind of like this triangle of shine that I want to make sure that I keep slightly lighter than the rest. But I am going to add a light layer of shading to it. But I'll just add darker shading around it to give that nice look of it being lighter. Okay. I'm checking to make sure that my pencil's nice and sharp, which it is. That's really important. Let's work on this side. I'll work on toning down some of the highlights in a bit because they're not all extremely bright. Okay. So I'm going to add a bit more shade into this highlighted section. I'm going to move on to using the 4H on that highlighted area so I can get some shading down without it being too dark. And if I try to use the darker pencils really lightly, then I'm more likely to get a fuzzy result. So I'm just going to go in with the 4H pencil so I can get clean lines and it won't look fuzzy, but we'll manage to add the right amount of shadow for the highlights. Adding some 4H over this part. And I want to switch to using the B pencil now as well. And now I'm going to blend it out using that exact same part of the blending stump. I don't want to use a clean blending stump because that will just be getting it dirty for no real reason. I don't need to get another one dirty for the sake of it. I'll just use this end. And the more layers you do, the smoother it's going to get. It'll get nice and smooth, like you can see. There we go. Okay, so now what I'm going to do, now that I've got it all nice and smooth everywhere, I'm just going to go in with the black polychromos and just use that to darken up the pupil part. And it will just get this pupil really nice and dark, as it is the darkest part. And I'll also use this on the outer edge of the iris. There we go, it just makes it really nice and dark. Let's go ahead, add this to the outer edge. Just on these very, very darkest areas. If you don't have this, then you can just use something like an 8B pencil. You don't have to use this if you don't have it and you don't want to buy it. Just use the darkest graphite pencil you have. But if you do have this, then I think this is a great one to use just to get it really, really dark, to make those shadows really deep and nice. Feather it out towards the rest of the eye. I'm going to shade over that whole section. Glazing that layer over the whole area. I'm adding some of this throughout the highlight as well for the eyelashes that are being reflected in the highlight. There we go. We will be brightening up the highlight with the eraser in a second. Just want to get all of these shadows down and looking good. And then we'll move on to adding highlights. So I'm looking for the unique shadowed flecks. Add all these shadows down here. This bottom part is a bit darker as well. Nearly finished with this now. Now I'm going to blend it out with that same blending stump a bit. Just blend it out a little bit. Now the final thing that I want to do is go in with this kneaded eraser and add in the highlights. So I've just got it to a nice fine point and I'm just going to lift up those highlighted areas just to really make the iris pop, really make it stand out. Graphite does lift up really quite easily, a lot easier than, for example, charcoal does or coloured pencil. It just really nicely lifts up. So try to avoid using your fingers to blend, otherwise you'll put in your oils from your hand onto the paper. So I'm just using the kneaded eraser to lighten it up, and then if I want to sort of tone it down, the highlights, then I'm just going back in with the blending stump until I'm happy with it. There's also a brighter highlights down here that I want to get in. I'm also going to use a little bit of normal eraser, just add in this more defined highlight. And on this side, I'm just looking for all of the subtle highlights that I can add, any lighter little patterns. I'm just going to add using this bit of eraser. And this will really make it look like your iris is shining, like give it that nice glassy effect to it. I'm going to pull up this really bright little highlight here and then go back with the black polychromos just to shape it because it's nice and small. There we go. And I'm just going to sweep the eraser over this darkest area just to transition those areas a bit better into each other. There we go. Add that highlight. Again, they're not very dark, so just soften them up a bit. Once you've got enough sort of graphite on your blending stump, then you can use that to add more value and darken up certain areas just by using the blending stump. And now I'm going to go in with the B grade pencil and just use that to add some more detail. Because we've softened it up, we've got rid of a lot of the detail, a lot of the pencil strokes. And so I just want to add some detail to this eye now. Give it that more realistic look by showing the direction of my pencil strokes. Shade that area of the highlight. So just add the detail. And on this area, use a bit more pressure. I'm going to switch over to the 3B pencil to add some of these more shadowed details. And this attention to detail is going to really make it look realistic. Now I'm just adding some shading to the highlights that aren't quite as bright. Just tone them down. Just adding a shadow here with the 6B pencil. Shape this highlight. Add the polychromos pencil back on the pupil, on these side bits. And I'm going to go back in with the kneaded eraser just to pull up the main highlight. And then I'm going to go in with the 6B pencil just to now shape that highlight a bit more. I want the highlights to look nice and crisp, not fuzzy around the edges, because they're nice and crisp in the reference photo. So I'm just going to go around them and shape them as accurately to the shape of the reference photo as I can. There we go. Add some shading now. And I think that's pretty much what we're going to do for the iris for the moment anyway. So now I want to start working on the white of the eye. And so I'm going to go in first with the 4H pencil, and I'm just starting to shade in a base layer for the white of the eye. And one thing you'll notice is that the white of the eye isn't actually white. There's a lot of sort of shadow to it, quite a bit of darker greys and even black shading towards the top area where the lash line will be. So it's not just white. And that's a mistake that a lot of beginners make, is just doing the white of the eye white, not adding much shading at all. Whereas in reality, it can be quite dark and it can require quite a lot of shading. In some cases, the shading can even be darker than parts of the iris itself. So again, just going in with that 4H pencil, we're just using that to add a base layer. We will be building this up with the B grade pencil and even the darker pencils, but for now, just getting in a layer of this 4H. The white of the eye is quite textured, there's quite a lot of veins, so I'm not worrying too much about making it ultra smooth. It will smooth out a lot anyway when I use the blending stump to blend it. I'm now going to jump into using the B grade pencil for this darker shading over here. I want to just go in and add a base layer. And also to the top here where it's the darkest because of that lash line, just get that in. And on this side in the corner, and again on that lash line, just get in that shading. Make it nice and dark. There we go. Do the same here. I'm going to go around some of these highlights so I don't get them too dark. It's just generally quite dark in this corner. So just glaze this B pencil over the whole area. There we go. There's also a bit of shadow directly around where the iris is. And on this side. There we go. And I'm even going to switch over to adding a bit of the 3B pencil. So I'm going to add that to the top here. Basically for the darkest sections, I'm just going to apply a bit of the 3B pencil. There we go, underneath as well. And to the corner on this side. And so now I'm going to go in with the blending stump, and I'm going to use the clean edge, and I'm just going to use this to soften everything out using circular motions, and it just makes everything really nice and smooth. You can just see how smooth it's made everything. And we will be adding a second layer to this, and then all of the texture as well. And blending it into the iris so that it's more of a soft edge, not so harsh. There we go, just blend that out. Nice and smooth. Now let's go in with the B grade pencil. Let's add a second layer of shading in this area. And to the corner over here and on the top. We'll probably use the B grade pencil to add all of the little textures, because they'll still need to be quite subtle, so we won't be using really dark pencils to do all of the tiny sort of veins. Let's blend that out a bit, just soften that out. Now let's go in with the 6B pencil. Let's use that for these really dark areas. So mainly in this corner over here and for the tear duct. So just look at the reference photo and identify where the darkest shadows are. It tends to be in the corner for the eyes, the corner of the white of the eyes and the tear duct. But just make sure you double check with your reference image to make sure that's the case with yours, because they can all be sort of different. Some might not have much shading at all, it might not be in much shadow. So just look at your reference photo for when you try and apply these techniques for your own sort of references. Like, even if you're following along with me here, try to think about why I am using these sorts of values so that you can apply this stuff to your own images. Like, don't just copy without really thinking about why I'm doing what I'm doing. It's like I'm just building it up with the 6B pencil now to get these areas even darker, as dark as they are in the reference. And on this corner over here, and I'm making sure that I keep blending with the blending stump so that it's nice and soft. There we go, blend, blend, blend. Might even go in with a little bit of that black polychromos, just a tiny bit, just on this part here and up there. Maybe in this little corner here, just the tiniest bit. Not much, just a tiny bit. Just to really make them nice and dark and deep. Add a bit here as well. I'm going to go back in with the 6B. Really darken up this whole sort of section. Go in with the blending stump, blend that out. Add some value down here as well. And now I want to add in some of the textured veins. So to do this, we're going to go in with the B grade pencil. And I'm just going to take that and look for the main sort of veins, and I'm just very lightly going to add them in. You don't have to do it exactly the same as the reference, just look for the general gist of the direction they're going in and how many there sort of are. And we will be using the blending stump to go over these so they're not so sort of harsh. Add a bit more shading down here. Let's go in. Just really add those veins. Apply a bit more pressure on some of the veins that stand out a little bit more, so that when we go over with the blending stump, these still are quite prominent. Just add some shading on this side. Okay, go over with the blending stump, just sweep it over, tone them down a little bit, not too much. And finally, I want to go in with the kneaded eraser just to lighten up some of the highlights. So I'm just going to sweep that over and dab it on the areas that I just want to lighten up a bit. So just dab it over those areas and it will lift up that sort of graphite. There's a little highlight just here, so I'm just going to use the kneaded eraser just to pull up that little highlight. And also there's a little highlight within the tear duct, so I just want to get in those highlights as well, just to make it look nice and realistic. If any highlight goes too bright like that, just sweep over with that blending stump again and it will nicely tone it down. I'm going to pull up a highlight here. There we go. So now we've got that done. Add a bit more of a highlight in here. Okay, so now what we're going to do is start to work on the skin around the eye. So now I'm going to work on the skin around the eye, and I'm going to first go in with the B grade pencil and start to get in this crease. So let's just shade in this crease. I want to make sure that I've got that blocked in. So just lightly sweep that B grade pencil over where that crease is, and now I'm just going to add a bit more thicker shade in just to make it look nice and natural. Gonna add some shading now across the whole of the upper eyelid using the side of that B grade pencil to make sure that I get it nice and smooth. I'm leaving out the main highlighted areas with less shading, but mainly this B grade pencil is going to go on most of the areas. There we go. So this area is quite highlighted, so I'm not going to apply too much pencil on that particular highlight. Like I said, when we blend it out with the blending stump, you automatically add a bit more value to it anyway, so it's not going to be completely white. Even if you leave it completely white, you'll still get a bit of value added to it. Now I'm going to add a bit of shading to the darkest part of this waterline. There you go, just sweep the pencil across, keep it nice and smooth. Also there's quite a bit of shading in this inner corner here. So up towards this point there's a bit of shading on this waterline. I'm also going to apply some shading to this lower part just under the waterline, just using that B grade pencil, sweeping it across. Use those circular motions. It's going to be very smooth when we blend it out, so don't worry if it looks too messy. Just go across the whole area with this. Stop it at this sort of crease. We'll just do up to the crease for now. I just like to do small sections at a time. There we go. We'll be moving on to adding some of the freebie pencil as well to darken up the shadows. There we go. So now I want to go in with the 3B pencil. And let's just use that just to darken up some of the shadows, like the crease itself. That's going to be nice and dark. We'll be using the 6B for that as well. And also just above the eye as well. That's nice and dark, where the eyelashes are going to be coming from. There we go. There we go, just add in some more shading to the creases and just below the waterline area as well. So there's this darker section here as well. Trying to get in some of these darker creases. Add the darker shading across this shadowed area. And on this side, this sort of middle area is quite light, so I'm not adding too much shading directly on that section. And now I want to jump into using the 6B pencil, mainly adding this to the actual crease itself and above the eye as well. Move on to this part. There we go. Shade it a bit downwards. In a minute we're going to be blending it out with the blending stump. Just add some shading down by this crease. We can always build it up if we need to in a minute. This 6B will need sharpening as well in a minute. It's getting a bit too blunt for me. So you might not think this looks blunt, but for me it is, and you shouldn't wait for it to get really blunt until you actually sharpen it. You need it constantly being at a nice sharp point. And these 6B pencils and the darker, softer pencils are going to need to be sharpened more than, for example, the 4H will. You'll probably be able to get away with not sharpening the 4H pencil, but with these softer ones, you're going to need to sharpen it a lot more. So I'm just getting in that shading. Quite a lot of shadow down here in this sort of area. There we go. So now I want to go in and I want to actually blend this out. To do that, I'm going to use the slightly bigger stump and again just sweep that over the area. Not going back and forth too much yet. You can use circular motions because that won't give you start and stop points, but going back and forth will give you start and stop points. So just smudged up to the part of skin up here. There we go, just blend this out. Sweep that blending stump. Use circular motions to really get rid of any stubborn pencil strokes that are showing through. There we go. So now that we've got our first layer down, I'm going to build up even more shadows. I'm going to go straight in with this 6B pencil, use that to darken up this crease. That is where it mainly needs to be darkened up. So let's go straight in and darken that up. Bring the pencil down a bit. There we go. And also this section here, and just a bit above the eye. There we go. This is mainly going to be where the eyelashes are going to come from. I'm going to go over this again with that same blending stump, the dirty side, blend that out, go back in, darken it up again, keep getting that nice and dark. Blend that out again. I'm going to darken up this crease and also the waterline in this inner corner, well, outer corner. Blend that out. Shade again with the 6B. I'm just still building it up until I get it as dark as I want it to be. It's darker towards these outside edges, so I'm going to add a little bit of the black polychromos just to this part here because that is the darkest section, just to really add that shadow, add that contrast to those darkest areas, also to that inner corner of the tear duct as well. I'll probably do all of the eyelashes with the Faber-Castell Polychromos pencil as well to get that darker look. Just adding a bit more of that Polychromos in the inner corner here. And again going over that with the blender, blend that all out. Okay. Tiny bit more shading down here. And up in this section. Shade this section. And next we're going to be adding the highlights. So Just add some shading. I really want to define this crease a bit more from the rest of the shadows. Get those creases in, blend that out. So I want to go in with my kneaded eraser. Here it is. So the main highlight is on the waterline. It's really bright in this inner corner. So let's get that kneaded eraser, make it into a point and just sweep it across. There we go. And it gets more and more shadowed towards this part here. So I'm going to lighten it up so I don't lift as much of the graphite in those areas. There we go, just lightly ease it in and then use a bit more pressure for these brighter areas. And then it continues to be bright as you go down on the skin. So I'm going to sweep the kneaded eraser up towards this section over here. And then again, as we go towards the outer corner, it becomes more and more shadowed. So I'm easing off the kneaded eraser. I'm using more of a defined edge if I want to make the creases and the sort of texture. And I'm going to add the highlights up here as well. And in the middle of this section, sweep it across the center. And now I'm going to use a bit more pressure for these brighter highlights. Just want to get them in. They're directly above this area, so that's where I'm placing them highlights. Made sure that I went in the direction that they were going in the reference photo. And so I'm working on the inner corner again as well. And here. And I'm just adding all of the highlights in this whole area. For the brighter ones, use a bit more pressure on the kneaded eraser. For the more subtle ones, just very lightly use that eraser, dab it onto the area that you want to lighten up. There we go. Sweep it over here. You can add some of the details with the 4H as well. Some of these like little texture marks that are really sort of light. You can use the 4H to get that detail in there. There we go. Getting those creases. We'll add more detail once we've got all like the skin blocked in. For now it's just about getting in these sort of shadows, getting the main shapes blocked in. Now I'm going to add the 6B pencil over in this corner. There we go. Want to make sure that it gets nice and dark towards that middle section. Add in more of the 6B now. There we go. Fading this out. Adding some of the texture, some of the creases. Okay, so now I'm going to get the rest of the skin in. So let's go with that B grade pencil and let's use the B and shade it on the whole of this area first. So there's not too much texture actually, like many creases going on above the eye, between the eye and the eyebrow. So let's just add a nice smooth layer of this B grade pencil first, quite evenly across the whole thing up to where the eyebrow is. There we go, even across there. Use the side of the pencil to make sure that you're getting a nice even coverage. Okay. And it also limits how much pressure you're applying onto the pencil so that you won't press too hard and get really stubborn pencil strokes showing through. There we go. Just keep using the side of that pencil, go in different directions. Rotate the pencil as well so that you have a nice clean sharp edge that you're using. This will help get into all of the crevices of the paper. Also add some of the shading down here as well, to this area down here. Still using the side of that pencil. So now I'm just going to use that B grade pencil again and just keep building up more and more layers on the darker areas. Now that I've added a base layer to the whole sort of area, I'm just going to add this area where there's more creases. Let's concentrate on getting them in. You don't have to get it exactly like the reference photo. It's just about getting that sort of texture in those areas. There's also this sort of crease under the eyes, this sort of bag here. Shade that all in. So the darkest area of this is about here. So just concentrating more of that B grade pencil in that area to really get it nice and dark. Like that. There's a bit of shadow around this area as well. I'm going to switch over to the 3B pencil. It's getting a bit scratchy. Let's add the shading down here, add that shadow. Add the 3B shading here because this area in general is quite dark. So add a base layer of that and then we can add the lighter creases, pull them out with the kneaded eraser. Randomly add some of these creases. Add these shadows. I'm even going to switch over to the 6B pencil. Just getting these darkest shadows, these darkest areas. And down here. Just work on adding the shadows over here. Being very light so that I don't get stubborn pencil strokes showing through when I blend this all out. Keep it nice and light. Add the bit of shadow above this upper eyelid. Remember, once we've blended out our first layer, we can go back and add more shadow if we need to. Still using the side of that pencil. There we go. Add in some darker shading just under this main bag under the eye here. Get that nice and dark. Add in some more shading. And so now I want to go and blend this out, and to blend it out I'm going to use the largest stump. And so let's just go over the whole area. Just keep sweeping this over. Start at one end, blend to the other. Avoid doing lots of back and forth motions. And pressing quite firmly onto the stump. keep sweeping all the way to the other side, or this other way. I'm going in circular motions. Blend it up towards the eyebrow, add some tone to the eyebrow. Now blend out this section. It's slowly getting nice and smooth. There you go, use those circular motions to make it really smooth. And you will get a nice smooth result. It's okay if it's not completely smooth because we have got to pull out highlights and add texture anyway. I'm also adding some value to the lighter area of skin up here. Just darken that up a bit. I'm going to go in with my 6B pencil and just add some more shading to the darkest areas of this skin. We want to make sure that we're getting that contrast right. So just keep building up those shadows to get them as dark as we need them to be. I always like to do the eyelashes last, by the way, as the last thing I do with the eye. Then I'm going to go blend it out with that dirty part of the big stump. Just soften over that. Going back in with the 6B after, add some more value to that area. add another layer of the 6B, blend it as I go. Build up the shadows over here. Another tip is if you're drawing something and the reference you're using is in colour and you're trying to draw it in graphite, make sure you turn it into a black and white image. Otherwise it's going to be very hard to figure out how dark your values need to be if it's still in colour. So this was originally a coloured reference, so I just put a black and white filter on it so that I could see where all the shadows and the highlights was. A bit easier, and it will make a world of difference to your drawings if you do that. It will make it so much easier for you guys. So I'm still just building up those shadows. Keep blending. There we go, it's getting nice and dark now. So we need to get all of this nice and dark. Add some more shadow over here. Nearly done now, add in the shading. Again, just add some more 6B to this area, just to the areas that you want to make even darker. There we go. Okay, so we've got the base of that in. Now I'm going to add the shading around where the eyebrow is. Just get that blocked in. Add a base layer to the eyebrow. Just going to rub the stump on that area because it doesn't matter if this is completely smooth because we're going to be adding lots of hairs on it anyway. But I just want to add a bit of tone to it so that it's not really light underneath. So just blend around. Okay. So now before I work on the skin, I just want to block in the eyebrow. So I'm going to take the 3B pencil and just start to blocking the eyebrow hairs. And it's really important to look at the direction that the eyebrow hairs are going in. That's really, really important. So I'm getting in that basic shape. You don't need to draw in every single eyebrow hair. Just get in the basic direction. So it tends to be that it's thickest towards this inner corner, and then it gets a bit more thin. It flows in this direction, and then also you've got eyebrow hairs from above joining into it, and also stray hairs underneath it. Also just going to add a bit more value for the skin around the eyebrow. And I'm going to blend that out using the clean side of the stump. So I'm going to build up those eyebrow hairs slowly, using more and more pressure on this 3B pencil. Okay, so pretty much got the basics in now for the eyebrow. I'm going to jump onto using the 6B pencil. I'm going to build that up even more. We'll be doing most of the eyebrow hairs using the black polychromos. But again, we're just trying to get in the direction and the structure of it first. We'll be blending this out. So I'm just working on adding the areas where it's a bit more full, there's a bit more hair there. Just slowly build it up. I'm going to sharpen my 6B pencil so it's nice and sharp. There we go. Nearly got all of the basic direction in. I'm going to add some more shading. as well with that 6B pencil. Blend that out with the stump, and I'm also blending out the eyebrow now with the stump as well. Add in some more shading around the eyebrow and also to the skin under the eyebrow as well. Remember, sweep the stump rather than going back and forth. So now I'm going to go in with the 6B pencil again. Just build up these shadows. Build up these hairs, these dark hairs. So don't worry if it's not looking dark enough, we will be adding the darkest hairs using that black polychromos, so don't worry, they will get really, really dark. As dark as these other areas. Now I'm going to blend that again with my stump. Blend it down to the skin around it. Give that more shadow. Go in again with the 6B pencil. There we go. So now I want to go in with the black polychromos pencil, and I'm going to get in all of the really dark hairs with it. So make sure it's nice and sharp when you do this. I'm going to shade some of the black polychromos into this crease as well. Just darken that up a little bit. add more shading down here, just using the pencil on the stump. Now just build up some more of that shadow. This area is more sort of dense with the hair, so it's going to be darker. There's also some hairs coming up from above into the area. There we go, add some more of the black polychromos in this crease here. Just add a bit more shading with the black polychromos down there. And on this side where this crease is. Add some more dark shading to this section. Add a bit more of the 6B in this area. So now I'm just going to add some of the texture using the 3B pencil. So zoom in to the image and I'm just going to look at the way the creases are going. So the texture, just look at the direction and just create some detail. Getting these main creases as well. So I'm just copying what I can see from the reference. When I spot that a shadow needs to go darker, I tend to do that when I notice it. Also applying a bit more pressure to get some of these darker creases in. Add the creases down here as well. Even the faint ones, I want to lightly get them in. Keep blending with the blending stump. Going to blend over some of these creases, tone them down a bit. And go in again, add some more. Add some of the texture up here as well. There isn't too much texture, but I am going to give it a bit of texture. There's quite a few light eyebrow hairs in this area. I'm going to add some more shading as well, make it a bit darker. Really add some more shading to the area, especially above this crease. You want to get that nice and dark in this section here. So I'm just going to blend over that. Do it again if you need to. Just make sure you're getting it nice and dark. Add a bit of shading around the eyebrow as well. So let's look, there's some shading over here. Shading above it. So I'm just tweaking any bits that I need to make darker. I'll be working on adding highlights in a second. I just want to get everything dark enough and add all of the sort of darker texture. And then I'll be pulling up the lighter texture using the kneaded eraser. Let's add more shadow over here. Okay. I'm going to add some shadow over here. Again, just keep adjusting things until you get them how they need to be. Don't want to spend too much longer on this, so I'm going to get into adding the final shadows on the creases now. And to do that, let's use this Polychromos, but I want to sharpen it so it's nice and sharp. Okay. So now I'm just going to add some of the shadows using this black Faber-Castell Polychromos pencil. I'm just looking for the main creases, the darkest creases as well. Just get them in. So I'm just adding some of these shadows around the eye as well. Basically just adjusting anything I need to at this point, anything that I notice needs to go darker. Just add in these final shadows. Add some final shadows to the eyebrow as well. So now I'm going to go in and just add some of the highlights, and to do this I'm going to use the kneaded eraser. So let's first work on all of these creases. So I'm going to mould my kneaded eraser into a sharp point and just use it just to add some of the texture. Again, I'm not following the reference photo exactly. I'm just creating the look of some creases in this area, in the same area as the reference photo. I'm actually going to switch over to using this sharp bit of eraser. Going to brighten up that waterline a bit more. Remember, we will be having the eyelashes coming from that area as well. So if it looks a bit strange, a bit bare, that's probably why. Just sweep the eraser over that area. Add some thin creases over here as well. So I'm just adding these highlights again. Some of the highlights might have been kind of darkened up as we blended with the blending stumps, so just go back over them. Also going to add some highlights down here. I'm going to use the kneaded eraser for this because these are just a bit lighter. I'm going to go over this with the blending stump in a second to tone it down. Just lightening up this area now. and also this central area, just using that kneaded eraser. Blend over it a little bit, tone it down. Blend over some of these. Zoom back in, and again. Gonna get the Polychromos black in, just go in between some of these highlights. Blend it with the kneaded eraser again, just over the whole thing. Lift it up a bit. Again, going in, adding some details. A few markings with the kneaded eraser. I'm going to cut a bit off the normal eraser that I have, and I'm just going to use this to create those little tiny lighter hairs up here. Look at the direction that they're going in. Some are actually on the eyebrow. Shouldn't be blending with my finger. I'm going to cut off a thicker bit of the eraser. It won't bend as much. I will blend over these to make them less intense. There's a few of these hairs over here as well. Blend over that with the stump, tone it down. There we go. I'm just going to tone down some of these areas, and I'm going to go in with the 4H and add some little details, some little detailed creases. Going in with the black polychromos, darken up some of the creases. Blend over that area. So now what I want to do is I want to go in with my black polychromos. I'm going to go in with the 6B first though, and let's block in those eyelashes and get the eyelashes in. Just add some shade in here. So I'm going to go in with the 3B pencil, and I'm going to use this to block in some of these eyelashes now. Some of the eyelashes are going down to the white of the eye as well, so keep that in mind. Add the eyelashes on the bottom as well. Just look at the direction that they're going in. Again, you don't have to do them exactly the same as the reference photo, but get the general gist of the direction they're going in. How many is there? How long are they? Again, they're overlapping onto the white of the eye over here as well. So now I'm going to go in with the black polychromos pencil and start to thicken and darken up these eyelashes. So I'm just going over these eyelashes that I've drawn out with the 3B, just going over them. Going to thicken up the roots of the eyelashes now. Get them all nice and thick, and then they need to go thinner at the end. So just thicken up the roots and you'll get this sort of look. Shade over the crease again. I'm going to darken up the bottom hairs now, the bottom eyelashes. Again, I'm going to go through and thicken up the roots just a little bit. I'm going to go back through the eyebrow, darken up some hairs on there. I'm going to go over some of these eyelashes again. Make sure they're dipping into the white of the eye. I'm going to do some more shading on the inner corner. Blend that out. I'm going to use the 6B pencil now just to add some more shading to the white of the eye. Going to add some of the veins as well. Going to wipe a kneaded eraser across this area. Just add in some final highlights. Just add in some final shadows. Gonna go through these eyelashes once more, just darken them up, thicken up some of these roots. Lighten up this eyelash. Just going to add a bit of highlight to the end of some of these eyelashes like there is in the reference. Now I'm just going to go in with the 4H pencil just to add some more details within this highlighted section. Going to add a bit of shadow here as well. Just going to go in for a final time with the kneaded eraser just to lighten up the main highlights again, just to make the brightest areas really pop and stand out. Now I'm just going back in with the black just to darken up some areas on the iris. Just adding the final shadows, the final dark hairs. Making sure the eyelashes are dark enough. So yeah, anyway guys, that is how I would go about drawing an eye in graphite. I really hope you enjoyed the tutorial, and let me know if you have any questions about the tutorial, if you have anything that you're struggling with and you want me to answer it, then I'll try my best. And I'd love to see what work you create using these tutorials, so make sure to post it to the community page so that I can have a look at it. I'd really love to see what you guys produce from this tutorial, even if it's not using this reference, even if you're using your own sort of reference for it, that's fine. I'd love to see how you'd apply this to a different reference, because I think it's important to do these tutorials but then also apply it to your own reference photo that you choose, to see if you can apply the techniques to something else where I'm not necessarily telling you what to do. And that will indicate whether you've really learnt it properly or not. So finally, I just want to make some final adjustments. So for example, I feel like these white hairs are a bit too defined, a bit too harsh. So I'm going to go in with just a normal piece of tissue, and I just want to blend that out so they're not so harsh and so they're more subtle. And I'm going to do the same thing with the crease down here. Just soften all this out. I feel like it's very textured, a lot more textured than in the reference photo. So I'm just softening all of those bumps out. You do still want to be able to see some of the hair texture, but now it's a lot softer than it was. I'm going to go in with the B pencil and also work on adding some more little tiny creases, little details down here. Also going to add some of the darker loose hairs. And I also want to darken up the actual iris part as well. It's a lot lighter than in the reference photo at the moment, so I just want to darken that up. I'm going to darken up the areas of the tear duct as well. But mainly let's go in and darken up the iris. So I'm using the 6B pencil. And I'm adding this to the darker shadows. I'm now going to go in with the freebie and go over some of those lighter areas. Also down here. Adding some more 6B as well now. I'm shading some 6B over by the corner over here. I'm going to blend that out with the blending stump. And add a bit more shadow to the tear duct here. So again, I just want to lighten and blend out this area. Using a clean part of the tissue. Smooth over this whole area. And then go back in with the 3B just to create those darker creases. Add some more shadow across here. Also add some more shadow along here as well. Creating some of these little creases over here. And adding a bit more shading to the corner on this side. Blend that with the tissue. Blend over these highlights as well. Add some shadow. I'm adding some shadow now to this part here. There's quite a bit of shadow and also some little creases. Now I'm shading some of the freebie again over these more subtle highlights in the iris. Same over here. Just want to get this area nice and dark like in the reference. Gonna add some more 6B. Also adding that 6B near the tear duct again. I'm going to blend this part with the blending stump. I'm going to add some more 6B and blend it out again. Add some 6B to this side, blend it out. Now I'm adding all of the little veins. Sometimes when you do like the iris and the white of the eye, you might think it looks dark enough until you add in all of the other areas, and then it really shows that it does need to go darker. Because when you've just done like the iris and the white of the eye, you're just comparing it to the white background, so it's gonna look a lot darker than when you get the other values in. So now I want to go in with the Faber-Castell Polychromos pencil, and I want to use this just to darken up the iris. I want to give the pencil a little sharpen. So I'm just focusing on the darkest areas with this now. So I'm going to add some black around the tear duct area as well, and on the crease. So now what I want to do is go in with the blending stump and just blend this whole area out. Even over the highlights. I want to blend it in with the white of the eye a bit more. Just add in some darker shading over here now, just so that it doesn't look so sort of wide. It needs to look more narrow, so just bringing down that shading. Add it a bit over here as well. I'm just looking at the reference photo and looking for areas that need to go a bit darker. I'm going to add some shadow between these eyelashes now. Add some more little veins. Adding some little markings just around the iris as well, just to help transition it into the white of the eye. Add some more black through the eyebrows as well. Let's add a lot more shadow to the tear duct. There isn't this many highlights and lighter areas. Add in some more of the veins. Now I'm just looking around, seeing if there's any other areas that I want to darken up. I quickly just want to pull out a few of the highlights in the iris, but not too many. I'm not going to lighten them up too much. There we go. Add the highlight in the white of the eye as well. And in the tear duct. I'm shading over some more of these subtle highlights so they're not so bright. Add a bit more shading here. Now I'm going in with the tissue. I want to soften these areas out a bit more. Add a few tiny hairs. Go back in and soften it out. I want to add some more black just to the eyebrow. Just going to shade this area, blend that out. So yeah, anyway guys, that is it for this drawing. I hope you enjoyed it, and let me know if you have any questions, and if you do attempt this, please remember to post your attempts in the community page so that I can have a look at them. I'd really love to see what you guys created, even if you didn't use this reference. If you used something else, I would still love to see what eye drawings you have done, or even just what you're working on. It can be anything you want. I'm just going to erase a bit of this eyelash because it's just a bit too cluttered in this area at the moment. So I'm just lightening up that section. And then go back and add the correct shapes for the eyelashes. And you can see those few extra changes really does make a difference. Just going to add those couple of highlights down here. And then shade over it. So yeah, anyway guys, thank you for watching and I'll see you next time. Bye everybody!